municipality, and probably most other municipalities, we have an organic waste collection system that gathers up potential bioenergy. Are you aware of any places in the world where they actually use that municipal organic waste stream to feed, municipal bioenergy generation system?
Again, for the distance, this is about roadside bio-waste, about garden waste and so on, and any use that we know of that is put to in the world.
Well, Sweden actually imports rubbish, believe it or not. They've got their recycling stream so efficient, and they've got their what you're describing as burning municipal solid waste. They've got so many of those systems now that they actually bring in rubbish from other countries to put through those systems. So yes, you can do it. If you're going to burn an unsorted waste stream, this isn't my area by the way, but I do know a little bit about it, that you have to have very efficient combustion systems which are designed for that purpose. Otherwise they'll just turn into something like those incinerators that a lot of people used to have in their backyard when I was a child.
Which would the organic waste stream.
Sure. So that's like an undifferentiated waste stream. But there are technologies right now being used in places like Sweden which have very strict air quality laws, and the Swedes are happy with it. As I say, they're actually kind of bringing in extra feedstock, if you like. If you can separate out waste streams, the further up a waste stream you can separate it out, the less likely it is to be contaminated, and the easier it is to deal with that in the bioenergy system. So I mentioned one potential source of biomass for the kind of systems I've talked about tonight, or I've mentioned tonight, is council tree management programs. Generally speaking, you've got like a dedicated team, you've got trucks, councils have depots, you can kind of capture that waste stream way up and make sure that it goes into a place that it's kept clean and can then be put through these relatively simple combustion systems. That in between, at a household level, where you have that green waste, it gets a bit difficult because it's not a very high calorie fuel, high calorific value fuel. It's got a lot of water in it, and just the green waste itself isn't really very high calorific value. So you need to have, and there is that potential for contaminants, and the contaminants that get in are extraordinary. I mean, I've spoken to combustion engineers about this, and it's just astonishing the stuff that gets into even the supposedly nice, clean organic waste stream. So it's really very much a matter of how well that's, what sort of technology you like to use, how much you're prepared to spend, and how clean you can keep it. If you want to add something to that,
maybe in relation to the biogas. So biogas generators are pretty common in Europe, and it's a mature technology in Europe. I think it's been sort of around for 25 years now. They're widely used, particularly in Germany, but through Europe, for agricultural wastes and animal manures and all that sort of stuff, and using, digesting that and capturing the methane from those and using that to produce electricity.
Yes, right there, thank you.
Howard Byers from Violettown. Just a comment and a question. Aldo Wines in Stratfordshire run a wind turbine, and like you said, the proving of that wind turbine that it wouldn't affect the system, I think took them nearly 12 months. It was an enormous amount of time and effort just to prove to whoever the supplier was that it wasn't going to affect them. And a question: if we have people like Furphy's putting power on their roof, and there's no commercial sale for it on periods of weekends, we do have farming enterprises like dairy farms and certainly cool stores that have to run on those weekend times, regardless of what day of week it is. Is there a provider who can actually match the generator up with the farm that has a high energy requirement?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and I think it relates to a broader issue of if somebody has a lot of photovoltaics, for example, on their roof, why can't they sell to a neighbour who doesn't have sun on their roof? This is a very serious issue in Sydney, where the City of Sydney has a number of separated buildings some of which have good potential for solar, and they want to sell electricity to their own buildings. They want to transmit it. And the electricity distributors are not allowing them to do that because it would be taking money away from the distributors. And yet the economics are not good if they have to sell the electricity to the distributor at nothing or 6 cents a kilowatt hour and then allow the distributor to resell it at 20 cents to their neighbours. So I think this is an issue that is going to be resolved over a period of years with a bit of struggle. There's a lot of rhetoric about creating a free market in electricity. But if you can't sell electricity to your neighbour at 240 volts, which means very simple safety requirements, it's not challenging, as long as you have an electrician to check it. It's really just the electricity distributors wanting to maintain their power and business models. So I think this is quite an important issue, that the business model of electricity distributors as well as retailers is going to have to change, and they're going to have to get into the energy service bill business a lot more and to try and resolve some of these issues.
Yes, way up the back there, thank you.
Graham Oakes. For a place like Coote, if you wanted to store energy, say bulk energy, megawatt hours, you're not talking little batteries, big batteries, what are the options now? Like King Island, they put in vanadium batteries, are they successful? Are they economic? Or flywheels or large capacitors? What are the options for large storage, say for a community?
Well, storing electricity on a large scale is still very expensive. And one of the advantages of concentrated solar thermal power is that you're focusing the sunlight to produce heat, and that heat can be stored much more cheaply before it's converted to electricity than as electricity. You can store it in tanks of molten salt. Yes, there's a whole range of batteries being developed, and the vanadium redox batteries that you mentioned are still very expensive, and I'm not even sure if they're commercially available on any significant scale. They're a type of battery known as flow batteries, and the flow battery has advantage that you're storing the energy in liquid tanks. If you want to store more energy, you get a bigger tank and you put more liquid in. So there are real advantages there, and some types of flow batteries are now on the commercial market, I think, but not vanadium redox. And we still don't know how good they are, how many cycles, what can we get out of them in their lifetime, and so on. Flywheels are really designed for very short-term storage of periods of minutes, to smooth out outputs from, say, wind turbines or something like that. And it's debatable whether they're even needed. Pumping water uphill. I don't think you'll do a lot of that around Shepparton. But in places where you do have a large height difference, and you saw the picture of the seawater pumps hydro system in Japan, that has a lot of potential. Especially because with our simulation studies, we've found that the periods when there isn't a lot of wind or sun usually only last an hour or two. And so you don't need to have a gigantic dam storing the water. You only need a good height difference and big pipes so that you can generate a lot of power for short periods of time. So for some areas, pumping water uphill is probably a good idea. And then there's, I don't know, I'm sure my colleagues may wish to comment on some of the other storage systems that are becoming available. Well, one more comment I'll just make, that the lithium batteries are going to become probably half price in the next few years, because two large corporations are building gigantic factories to mass produce them on a huge scale. Tesla is one, and another company has now announced that it also is going into very large-scale production. And lithium batteries do have a number of advantages over lead-acid batteries and other more conventional batteries. So if they come down in price substantially, then I think we'll see them used on a much larger scale.
Yeah, I might just add a couple of things. I do tend to approach these problems from an engineering and from a financial perspective, because that's my background. I think right now batteries are definitely competitive in certain environments, and it's just, I guess what I try to say in my talk, and what I think you're picking up from what we've all said and what we're saying in the questions, is it depends. You know, it's very much based around what you're currently paying for power. Like I did some modelling on putting batteries into a house in Newcastle, in New South Wales, a couple of weeks ago, and they're paying 50 cents a kilowatt hour for their peak usage, which I was quite shocked by. I didn't realise that it got that much in regional New South Wales. The battery system was kind of close to stacking up there. It was, you know, I was actually a bit surprised that was based on their particular usage pattern. Other people's usage patterns, I think it would have been competitive. Other people's, it would have been clearly out of the ballpark. So I think it's actually very difficult to give a categorical, definitive answer to your question, other than it depends.
Yes, right here in the green shirt.
Rod, thanks. Colin Graham. We've talked a lot about energy use in stationary situations, but from a farm point of view, you need to run your tractor to grow food, etc. Now, what's happening in regards to ethanol, and I read something recently about some genetic modification that concentrates oil in the leaves of crops and that sort of thing. I mean, this might be a subject for another seminar, but have you got any thoughts on that?
That might be one I could probably start with at least. Yeah, I think it's a really exciting area. There's one of my other kind of activities is association with an agricultural science institute that's done some very clever work with genomics. We've just had a paper published on which I was a co-author in Nature Genetics, which is a very high impact journal. That there's extraordinary scope for doing, just using scientific breeding programs, just not even going near genetic GM techniques, but just using the standard scientific breeding programs with this kind of mix of genomic analysis and inferential techniques to determine relationships between the genome and the phylogenetic properties of the organism. Personally, I think that's going to be an absolute game changer. And there is a lot of work going on now, particularly in the States and some parts of Europe, on, as you just mentioned, there's a giant Russian, dandelion, I think, which makes lots of latex, you know? And it was actually being sort of semi-commercialised a couple of times, and there's a research team in Ohio at the moment that's breeding up this kind of Godzilla of giant Russian sort of dandelions to make latex. And I'm sort of making a bit of a joke, but it's actually attracting lots of money, these kind of projects. So I think your answer to the question is definitely down the track, absolutely. I personally think bioenergy is going to have a bigger role than perhaps what people might suspect at the moment, just because there is such an obvious opportunity for that kind of improvement. Let's not go in the future and sort of think about it's all going to be wonderful and terrific and so on. Let's just sort of come back to now. I spent a bit of time looking at ethanol production on a personal basis. No, it's illegal. I have spent a bit of time looking at ethanol production on a practical basis. In the UK now, it's actually legal to make 2,500 litres a year of ethanol for fuel use. In the US, for on-farm ethanol use, it's legal to make 40,000 litres a year. And now when I say legal, you still have to have some kind of registration with the equivalent of the local excise or whatever its current name is or particular names. But they've drastically reduced the restrictions on things like bonded stores and things like that, where it's very difficult to get those licences, very rigorous documentation process and so on. I've actually had this discussion with the ATO, informally, I should emphasise, where I've said, well look, this is happening in the Northern Hemisphere, how about down here? And it's actually a lot easier to get a distillation licence now than it used to be 20 years ago, much easier. And there's, I was actually surprised at just how open they were. They said, look, we tend to lag the Northern Hemisphere a little bit. If you come to us with a case for why we should perhaps look at the same thing here, then we'll certainly look at it. From a technology perspective, it's trivial. My original degree was in chemistry. distilling ethanol from fermented carbohydrates is literally trivial. I mean, there are people doing this, I'm told, in their backyards and so on. I don't, I should say. So that's definitely got potential. The farm I grew up on, we actually had an old petrol Fergie, so you could have actually used it. Well, not in that engine, that probably would have destroyed it, but you know, you can use ethanol in internal combustion engines, obviously. I mean, B85 engines, most modern cars are actually B85 capable, and you can make them, the E85, you can make them E100 capable relatively simply. You might struggle a little bit with a tractor because of the nature of the torque requirements. You know, petrol/ethanol engines don't have quite some of the characteristics that diesel engines do. But for diesel, you've obviously got biodiesel. Now, there are people around here doing that. There's a couple of hundred farmers in Western Australia that are doing biodiesel off canola. This is all first generation biodiesel. That, again, that's a very simple reaction to do. There's straight vegetable oil. There's a chap not that far from here who, what's his name? John, what's that fellow's name? Anyway, he's actually got a little pressing plant. He's growing Indian mustard as his break crop and pressing oil from that. He's got a tractor adapted to use that directly, and he's also running one of his vehicles on it. You can buy tractors in Germany now off the production line, which can run on straight vegetable oil. Of course, the nice thing about using straight vegetable oil is you avoid the whole excise and biodiesel issue. And I'll just wrap this up, and you know, if I'm sort of carrying on a bit, it's obviously something I'm interested in. When farmers used to use about between 10 to 20% of their land for growing food for their traction animals, you know, for oxen and horses and so on, I think you can actually make a reasonable kind of a case that you're not really kind of going this whole food or fuel thing if you use some of your land to grow some energy crop, which you then use to power your vehicles on your farm. And I've actually been floating this with some people at uni about maybe we should have a look at this research project, because I think it'd be very interesting to look at the economics, the other benefits that would flow from that, such as local energy resilience, economic resilience, and so on. So there you go, that's probably a lot more answer than you were hoping for.
Just maybe a point on that, in addition to the biodiesel and those sort of approaches, there's also things, of course, like minimum tillage and reduced tillage to reduce diesel usage, and there's a lot of work going on in that area, and a lot of adoption of that in Australia, particularly in the broadacre agriculture area. And the other relevant thing, I guess, there is part of our project. We had another company looking at energy efficiencies on farms, and one of the things they looked at was diesel pumps, diesel-powered pumps. There's a lot of diesel used for just running water pumps, and they found that to be very inefficient. And if you could replace those diesel-powered pumps with electric-powered pumps, that was another way to improve the efficiency.
One of the drivers of action on research and development in this area is the airlines, because they've got nowhere to go right now. Oil prices are going to go up and up, as Rod pointed out at the beginning, in the future. So they're starting to fly some aircraft with some engines on biofuels. My understanding is they use a form of biodiesel at present, and that's probably not viable on a large scale in the classical way of producing it, because it means growing lots of oilseed crops. But it may be possible to produce the appropriate fuels, a whole range of different biofuels using algae, and there's now quite a lot of research and development going on in algae, converting breeding algae, genetic engineering algae, getting the right algae to produce the right fuels under the right circumstances. But it's still early days.
In terms of aeroplanes, I would invest in rubber band. Farm machinery, Clydesdale futures would be a good one. Now, there was an arm up here, yes please.
Back again. I'm trying not to make a statement. I understand we're in an energy forum and we've concentrated on energy, but there's also you take farm produce off a farm to make energy, there's a loss of nutrient, and I think if we get psyched out and think every blade of barley grass, anything we take off the farm to make energy, I think we're actually defeating the purpose in the long run.
Yeah, you can backload the ash to the farm on the trucks that collect the fuel.
It's going to be as
see?
good as the
That's true, of course, and having organic matter in soils is really important.
Like I know,
In terms of soil.
your waste carrots, I know you could put it into the digester and make energy and all that, but probably don't back into the ground. And from my point of view, the prunings that I cut off in winter, by the time I go out straight them all and send them off the shed and then we get processed, I'm just happy to run through the emulsion. When I burn a big pile of trees, I can see that point of view.
And can I say, I think the stuff is just going to be situational. It's going to need, I think, because I'm not really very interested in participating in making another problem to replace the one we've got. It doesn't float my boat at all. I think you need to have some kind of prism or some kind of set of objective criteria that you can use to make sensible decisions on what does stack up from a sustainability perspective and what doesn't.
And this don't want to be digestive wombats because it's really economically.
Oh well, my wife and I might disagree with you. we've got a block down there in South Gippsland and bloody wombats and our young trees. Don't get me started on that one.
Wombats were here first.
True.
Anything else you'd like to know? Yes, down here, thank you, and we'll go up there next week, getting close to...
I'm not a farmer, and I want a question for Mark, and it goes back, I guess, to the session on the myths, Mark. But basically, you must have heard of Terry McCran, writes for the Murdoch Press, Herald Sun. He's written a couple of articles over us once. He had an article saying there were 3 hours which there was no wind in southeast Australia. And he was then taken to task this stupid notion that we have renewable energy, no wind, and not much sun around, we'd be stuffed, there'd be no power available for course. So I was wondering, I think in some way you sort of mentioned that in terms of the range of things, but I wonder if you'd actually like to respond to that a little bit. He actually did find there was one particular day apparently when there was 3 hours of boots and no wind.
In South Australia, that may well be true. Our computer simulations at present are limited to the southeast of Australia for wind, because what we've been doing is taking existing wind farms and then scaling them up. But we did some experiments, some computer experiments, by putting in wind farms. We have some data from Queensland and Western New South Wales and other places. And we found when we fed that data in, if the wind wasn't blowing in South Australia, it was certainly blowing in New South Wales and Queensland. Now, you still may get a few periods. We are now doing a study of 24 years of Australian data. It's a huge job organising that data. And we're hoping to collaborate with a team in Europe who can supply us with 33 years of wind and solar data right across Europe. So we're investigating that, but what we've already found in Australia is that from year to year, the sunshine is pretty, if you add up the solar energy over a year, it's pretty constant. Wind fluctuates a lot more, but in our system, we have a number of gas turbines on standby. And we do get a few of these periods, even when we simulated the year 2010. There's a few periods in winter evenings after overcast days, so there hasn't been much sun, there's not a lot of energy in the molten salt tanks of the concentrated solar thermal power, and the wind has been down, and the gas turbines come in. Now, even then, so our systems, at least for the period we've simulated them so far, can be made economically just as reliable as the existing system. Now, the existing system isn't 100% reliable. To make an electricity supply system 100% reliable, where supply always meets demand, would have an infinite cost, because you'd need backups, and then you'd need backups for the backups, and it would never end. And so, in fact, electricity systems are designed to have a certain level of reliability, a high level, but not complete reliability. And our systems match those. Now, what do you do when you do get periods where supply fails to meet demand in the existing system? Until recently, 13% of Australia's electricity was used by aluminium smelters. It's reduced a bit recent years, and what they do is they offload the aluminium smelters for up to 2 hours. You can do this. The smelters have these gigantic pots with liquid aluminium in them, and they're so hot that you can turn the electricity off for an hour or two without damaging the smelting process. Now, of course, the smelters in return pay almost nothing for the electricity that they get. They certainly get a quid pro quo. And you could do this. Now we're evolving what are called smart grids and smart devices. So you can have devices where, if you agree, if you sign a contract with your electricity supplier, they could switch off your air conditioner for an hour at a time, rolling across the state or across the whole area, right? They could switch off your fridge for half an hour. You wouldn't know the difference. And we now have those technologies, and they are cheap. The smart systems that have been installed in Victoria aren't really very smart, unfortunately. They're not really smart enough. But you can have devices that you can place in your circuits which are programmable, you know, which, if the price of electricity goes up because supply is down, they will automatically cut that circuit off for half an hour or something like that. And so what I'm saying is you can also adjust demand, and that's another way of dealing with rare events where you have an absence of supply, and certainly that can be applied to the existing system now. So that's another exciting dimension. So when we talk about electricity supply, it's not just about supply, it's about supply and demand. And in the past, the traditional view was demand was fixed, and also another view was demand would increase from year to year forever to infinity. Well, we now know that demand can be varied, it can be modified by technology and by behaviour. And also we know it does not increase from year to year. It's certainly not doing that right now in Australia and several other countries. So we have a much more fluid and flexible system, and it's very exciting. And we can play very exciting games with this system, if you want to call them games, where we can still have quite reliable supply, provided we modify demand as well.
Well, I think, Mark, it reminds me that I think for some time now, current reverse cycle which is current models, new models, now have the ability to, when the smart meters are working properly, the companies can actually change your air conditioner, so your cooling system doesn't work, but your fan's still blowing, and they can do that sort of some, spatially. So basically, because one of the big demands, of course, is the greatest demand for electricity, of course, in a few hours over summer when the demand's on electricity when we had our heat waves.
Yeah, but another very simple device which I've just got installed in my electricity meter box is a switch where you can adjust when a particular circuit switches on and off. And you can do that now, legally. So I've installed a heat pump hot water system. I want that system to only work during the warm part of the day when the heat pump is more efficient because it collects heat from the surroundings, and also when solar is generated. So you simply set the time when it is allowed to cut in and the time when it has to cut out. And it's a really simple device and a good German switch. It's not cheap, it's about $120 or something, but it's so simple. And already it makes a huge difference to your energy use and also to the effectiveness of your solar energy supply, particularly when you're in a situation where you don't get paid for feeding back into the grid. You have to adjust when your electricity using devices actually operate.
Some of that sort of thing, there's some larger vegetable growers that actually have generator sets sitting there that are designed to be used when their peaks are high. So they're designed to really trim their peak demand. And there's quite a lot of those being used, and there are companies that sort of orchestrate all of that. So that's just another way to.
Well, this will have to be the last, but thank you.
My name's Andrea Marshall. My husband and I have a small building company here in Maritna. We're looking at building homes that are low energy homes, but we're finding right from the start, finding blocks that are orientated in the right direction with a normally facing aspect. Even blocks like that are hard to find. So how do we get the developers to start at the beginning so that we can reduce energy costs of our homes?
Make it a council policy.
Absolutely.
I mean, right at the beginning, even your driveway quite often isn't situated on the right side of the house to have your house set up to lower your energy costs. So we need to have people thinking right at the start how we can develop homes that will reduce our energy consumption.
All right, well, I don't think anybody has an answer to that except the answer here. Clearly, all of this is, well, look, I will ask one last question before I ask Robin to come back up and close the session. How long have we got to do all this? Well, come on, you're the expert.
Well, if you look at the climate science, most of the scientists are saying if we haven't, on a global scale, peaked our greenhouse gas emissions by 2020, we'll have an almost impossible task to bring them down fast enough beyond that. So things are not looking too great from that point of view. The positive side is that there are several countries, many states, and hundreds of cities that are already moving towards 100% renewable energy and high energy efficiency. So there is those positive, but if you look at the whole world, we're facing a huge task. Politically, we're starting to hear very encouraging things coming out of China now. And as they're currently the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, they're vital. So is the United States. And so is Australia, because we are the biggest per capita emitter of greenhouse gas emissions of the developed countries. It's only a few oil states that are really high per capita emitters. So we've got a really urgent task, and I think we really have to go to zero emissions within a few decades, and possibly even start taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere if we can as well. So it's a serious thing. But
would it help if a number of, say, significant people stopped breathing? There's a lot of carbon dioxide exhaled in this world by people we don't need. But you have a very short space of time. Like our panellists, I travel a lot talking to people about these issues. The only joy I get out of life is when I leave metropolitan Melbourne and I come to a town or a city like Shepparton, and you realise that you people have a future. Melbourne doesn't have a future, it's too big. We'll never convert Melbourne to be a sustainable city, but you can. You can become an energy independent city. This has been about energy, and clearly you need also to think here particularly about water. That's going to be one of the great challenges for you. But as a city you can do it. And when I travel I see the only level of government that takes these issues seriously is local government. And that's the level of government that you need to pressure now to get these changes happening. You can't depend on the state government, Labor or Liberal, and you really can't depend on the federal government. The future's in your hands, and that will apply to everybody on the planet. By 2020, you've got to get your part of the world energy sustainable. Look, I won't say any more because we're well over time, but look, I think Robin will thank our panellists more formally than I would, but I'd just like to thank them very much for what they've done, and particularly you for coming and you for asking the questions.